When you look around the NBA media, one of the biggest, if not the biggest Jokic critics is Kendrick Perkins. And of course, Big Perk is also a massive Joel Embiid defender. As in the past 2-3 years, Perkins made a fool of himself routinely, overrating Embiid and undervaluing Jokic and his skill set. Now, today, thank God Perkins finally is calling out Embiid for his antics and ducking Jokic routinely.
Uplusha, okay? And you know what that means in Serbian?
What?
That means scared. And usually I'm joking and laughing about my word of the day, but damn it, Malika, I'm so serious right now when I say this. He's been scared for the last 4 years.
To have someone like Kendrick Perkins, in my view, the dumbest voice in sports, biggest Embiid defender, Jokic critic, saying that about Joel, it speaks volumes. And look, for once in my life, I 100% agree with Big Perk. As Embiid skipping these games, missing out on playing top-tier teams, opting to play the bottom-feeding teams, it's gotten out of hand and it's completely ridiculous. And when it comes to MVP, I would say last year and this year, Embiid pulling those stunts disqualifies him from winning that award. And typically speaking, being a top 10 player, top 5 player, some argue top 3, the standard you're held to is much higher. And being a one-time MVP, potentially back-to-back MVP, the standard you hold yourself to is much higher. Now, for Joel Embiid, one of the biggest playoff droppers of all time, the standard I hold him to isn't really that high. But even with that being said, Embiid constantly comes up short of that standard. And one of my biggest problems with Embiid, he is obviously injury prone, but even more so, picks and chooses which teams to beat up on and which teams to sit out against. And look, I found this pretty fascinating. Looking at Embiid and his road games missed versus road games played, it's a pretty interesting contrast. Of the games he's missed, at Minnesota, at New Orleans, at Boston, Miami, Houston, Orlando, Chicago, Atlanta, and Denver. Looking at those teams, 6 of the 9 are above 500. Now looking at games Joel has played on the road, at Washington, at Detroit twice, at Charlotte twice, Orlando, OKC, Toronto, Atlanta, Brooklyn, Indiana, and Milwaukee. Out of those 12 games, 8 of those teams are below 500. Could you call it a coincidence? Maybe you could. But when a player like Embiid is averaging 36 points per game, having a dominant year, you gotta look more in depth at his stats and the teams he's actually playing against. And more times than not, the teams he's beating up on are the bottom-feeding teams in the NBA. And conveniently enough, when he has a quote-unquote injury, needs rest, he's playing some of the top teams like the Bucks, Celtics, and of course, Denver Nuggets. And if you still want to debate Jokic versus Embiid, Embiid versus Giannis, the top tier guys, what you got to take into account these guys being available and being healthy. As historically speaking, Giannis and Jokic are almost always available come playoff time and during the regular season, compared to Embiid, who already has missed 12 total games before the All-Star break, compared to Jokic, who's only missed 1. And look, I'll give Adam Silver credit. One of the best things he's ever done is a rule change for a minimum games played to win MVP or make an All-NBA team. Guys playing in the mid-60s, low 60s, still making All-NBA teams, All-Defensive teams, even winning MVPs, was kind of disgraceful. I mean, for example, if one guy only plays 60 games to the other guy playing 80 games, and they have relatively equal seasons, the tie has to go to the guy who played 80 games. And it's about time Adam Silver, or the NBA in general, implemented a rule to punish those players who sit out games and reward those guys who are always available. And when it comes to Joel Embiid, my theory on him of why he's missing so many games. One, of course, he's ducking the tough matchups, ducking Jokic, Giannis, the top tier players. But also, he's doing it on purpose to limit himself winning MVP, having the burden of that pressure. As come playoff time, yet again he flames out, doesn't make the finals or even East Finals. The flack he'll get being a one-time MVP will be nearly as much as a two-time MVP. Now, looking back at Kendrick Perkins, of course his overall take was spot on. But in there, very quickly, he said Joel Embiid was the best offensive player in the world.
And everyone knows how I feel about Joel Embiid. I think he's one of the most skilled big men to ever play the game of basketball. I think he's the best offensive player in the game today.
When it comes to Jokic versus Embiid, who's the better offensive player? Who's the better playoff offensive player? Jokic, the better scorer, more efficient, the much better passer, better offense rebounder, and better shooter from nearly everywhere on the basketball court. If you're going to talk about who's the better offensive player, what you got to look at is the playoffs versus the toughest team, toughest matchups, with adequate rest and their best game plans. And quite honestly, the regular season, it's become so devalued, almost a joke, and some nights it's a glorified all-star game. So what you got to look to is the NBA playoffs. And when you do that, Jokic definitively is a better offensive player and better player in general than Embiid. So look, Perkins again had I would say 80% good take with a tiny pinch of an awful take. Look, it's progress, not perfection. Baby steps, that one day Perkins will have a foolproof great take. And one last thing I do want to hit on is the NBA's constant problem the past decade of load management. And look, this problem somewhat, it was fixed this year. As even guys like Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Davis, guys who load manage sit-out games, are playing the majority of primetime games and games in general. And having that 65-game cap for winning the MVP, making an All-NBA team, that's a brilliant idea. But the problem still persists, that some guys like Embiid are going to load manage no matter what. And for the NBA product, the fans, the ratings, people in the stadium paying money for those tickets, it just demoralizes them and disrespects the entire game. And if I'm Adam Silver, I'm kind of just tossing my hands up, like, what can I do? You find these teams, penalize them money-wise, that's a slap on the wrist, no one really cares. And worst of all, it's after the fact that it already happened. I mean, Mike Malone, the Nuggets coach, he was hinting at the NBA possibly investigating Embiid sitting out. They were going to do a deep dive on it, get to the bottom of the story, and really bring it to justice. Again, look, investigate it all you want, but it already happened, it's a done deal. What it comes down to with load management, players ducking games, is having much more pride like guys back in the day. As playing all 82 games, being the Iron Man of the NBA, it used to mean something. And unfortunately for guys today, it really doesn't mean anything, and sitting out games is commonplace. And if you want to talk Jokic versus Embiid specifically, the differences in those two players. Again, Jokic, always available, a playoff riser, an NBA champion, and a rightful MVP. Joel Embiid, I hate to say it, he's just one of those guys who has the talent or the potential, but that one little extra thing is just missing. And whatever that thing is, Jokic, he has it. The great ones like Magic, Bird, Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, Duncan, those guys also had that it factor that made them great. When I look at Embiid, I really don't see that in him. And until he wins a championship, has a deep playoff run, look, I'm going to keep saying it because it's true. As Embiid at this point is a glorified James Harden playing center. So, as always, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.